A 68-year-old man once told me something I still think about often. He said, "I've spent years trying to eat healthier, and somehow, my body still feels older than it should." He didn't smoke, he stayed active. He avoided fast food most of his life. From the outside, he looked like someone who had taken reasonable care of himself. But over time, his body began showing signs that concerned him. His blood pressure became harder to manage. His energy dropped. Recovery after small illnesses took longer than before. And when we talked in detail about his daily routine, one habit kept appearing again and again. Not sugar, not alcohol, not overeating. It was how he reheated his food. Most people over 60 never think about this. They focus on what they eat, but almost nobody talks about what happens after food has already been cooked once. The truth is, some foods change significantly when they are reheated. New compounds can form. Certain bacteria can become a problem. Oils begin to break down differently. And after 60, the body handles these changes much less efficiently than it did decades earlier. I've spent over 30 years working around cardiovascular patients, and one thing becomes very clear after enough time. Small daily habits quietly shape long-term health. What surprises many people is that some of the most common leftovers sitting in refrigerators right now may place extra stress on the body when reheated the wrong way. Not because one meal suddenly creates a problem overnight, but because repeated irritation inside the body slowly adds up over months and years. Today, I want to walk through 5 foods that deserve extra attention after 60, especially when reheated. Some of them may surprise you because they're often considered healthy foods. And before we get into the list, there's something important you need to understand about the body after 60. Your body is still incredibly capable. Healing still happens. Recovery is still possible. But the margin for error becomes smaller. When you were younger, your system could often compensate for things quietly. Minor inflammation, oxidative stress, low-quality oils, small digestive irritation. Your body adapted quickly. But with age, several systems naturally slow down. Blood vessels lose flexibility. Cellular repair becomes less efficient. The immune response becomes more sensitive in some ways and weaker in others. Digestion changes. Inflammation lasts longer than it used to. That doesn't mean aging automatically leads to poor health, not at all. But it does mean everyday habits matter more than most people realize. One of the biggest issues is chronic inflammation. Not the kind that helps you recover from an injury. That type is normal. I'm talking about low-level inflammation that quietly continues in the background day after day. Most people never feel it directly, but over time, it can affect circulation, energy, blood pressure, digestion, and even how efficiently cells repair themselves. And many reheated foods contribute to that process more than people expect. Let's begin with one of the most common foods in modern kitchens: fried foods. French fries, fried chicken, fried fish. Anything heavily cooked in vegetable oils like soybean, corn, sunflower, or canola oil. Now, eating fried food occasionally is one thing. The bigger concern begins when those oils are heated again. Because once oils are repeatedly exposed to heat, they begin to oxidize. And during that process, they form unstable compounds that create additional stress inside the body. This matters even more after 60, because arteries naturally become less flexible with age. When oxidized oils are repeatedly consumed, they may contribute to irritation inside blood vessels over time. Many people think the microwave is the main issue. But the real problem often begins with the oil itself. The second heating cycle is where things change dramatically. I remember speaking with a 71-year-old woman named Patricia, who reheated fried potatoes almost every evening because she hated wasting food. To her, it seemed harmless, practical even. But once she changed a few kitchen habits, she told me she felt lighter after meals and noticed less digestive discomfort within weeks. Now, I'm not suggesting you panic over leftovers. I'm suggesting awareness. If you do reheat fried foods, avoid adding extra oil during reheating. An oven or air fryer at moderate heat is usually a better option than reheating in a pan full of oil again. And sometimes, smaller portions fresh the first time may simply be the smarter choice. The second food surprises many people because it has a reputation for being extremely healthy. leafy greens, spinach, kale, Swiss chard. These foods contain valuable nutrients and can absolutely be part of a healthy diet. But after cooking and storing them improperly, the chemistry begins to change. Naturally occurring nitrates inside leafy greens can gradually convert into nitrites over time, especially if cooked greens sit too long before refrigeration. Then, when reheated, additional compounds may form that the body doesn't process as easily. This becomes more relevant after 60 because the body's ability to manage oxidative stress is not the same as it was earlier in life. One man I spoke with, Richard, age 69, reheated spinach every single morning with eggs because he believed he was making the healthiest breakfast possible. And in many ways, his intentions were excellent, but small adjustments mattered. Instead of reheating large batches for several days, he started preparing smaller portions fresh or eating leftover greens cold in salads. Simple change, very little effort. Sometimes health improvements don't come from extreme diets. Sometimes they come from understanding timing, storage, and preparation. The important thing is this: cooked greens should be cooled and refrigerated relatively quickly. Leaving them sitting out too long creates more opportunity for unwanted changes inside the food. And if you do save leftovers, cold preparations are often gentler than repeated reheating. Rice may seem harmless compared to fried foods, but this next one deserves much more attention than most people realize. Because reheated rice is connected to one of the most overlooked kitchen mistakes people make after 60. Rice is simple, cheap, comforting, easy to prepare in large amounts. That's exactly why so many people cook enough for several days. But cooked rice changes quickly once it begins cooling. Certain bacteria can survive the cooking process in dormant form. And when rice sits too long at room temperature, those bacteria may begin producing toxins that reheating doesn't fully remove afterward. This is where people get confused. They assume steaming hot rice automatically means safe rice. Unfortunately, it's not always that simple. The real issue is often how long the rice sat before refrigeration. I once spoke with a 66-year-old retired teacher named Helen, who used to leave cooked rice on the counter for several hours before storing it away, because that's how her family always did it growing up. Again, completely understandable. Many people learned these habits decades ago. But after 60, the digestive system becomes more sensitive to repeated irritation. Even mild food-related stress can affect energy, digestion, and inflammation levels over time. The goal isn't fear, it's prevention. If you cook rice, cool it relatively quickly and refrigerate it within about an hour when possible. Try not to keep it for multiple days. And ideally reheat it only once. Small habits like this matter more than people think, especially because chronic digestive irritation doesn't stay isolated in the gut. The body is connected. Inflammatory signals influence circulation, blood pressure, recovery, and overall energy levels. Many people focus only on calories and cholesterol, while completely ignoring food handling habits that quietly affect the body every week. Now let's talk about one of the most common proteins for adults over 60. Chicken, especially meal prep chicken. Chicken is popular for good reason. It's versatile, filling, and usually considered a lighter protein option. But problems begin when chicken is reheated carelessly, especially in the microwave. Microwaves heat unevenly. Some sections become extremely hot, while other areas remain cooler than people realize. And those cooler sections can allow bacteria to survive more easily. The outside may look steaming hot, while the center temperature remains inconsistent. That's why so many food safety experts recommend extra caution with reheated poultry. I remember a man named Walter, age 72, who reheated chicken in the microwave almost daily because he lived alone and cooked large batches every Sunday. It saved time, it reduced effort, and honestly, many people do the exact same thing. But once he switched to reheating smaller portions slowly in the oven, he noticed meals felt easier on his stomach. Again, not magic, not extreme, just smarter preparation. If you use a microwave, cutting chicken into smaller pieces first helps heat distribute more evenly. And letting it rest for a minute or two afterward also helps temperature stabilize inside the food. But when possible, slower reheating methods tend to work better. Or sometimes, cold chicken added to salads or wraps is the simpler option altogether. What many people fail to realize is that after 60, the immune system doesn't always respond to food-related stress the same way it once did. Even small exposures repeated regularly can place extra pressure on the body, and the body keeps score over time. Now, the final food on this list may be the most misunderstood of all: potatoes. Most people never think twice about reheated potatoes, but potatoes go through two important changes after cooking and reheating. The first involves starch. Freshly cooled potatoes develop something called resistant starch, which acts more like fiber inside the digestive system. That's actually helpful. It supports healthier digestion and creates a slower release of glucose into the bloodstream. But repeated reheating changes part of that resistant starch back into rapidly digested starch. That means blood sugar may rise faster afterward. And after 60, stable blood sugar becomes increasingly important for energy, circulation, and long-term cardiovascular health. The second issue appears when potatoes are cooked or reheated at very high temperatures repeatedly, especially with oils. Additional chemical compounds can form during excessive browning and repeated heating. This is why heavily reheated fries or crispy potatoes every day may not be the smartest routine long-term. I once spoke with a 67-year-old grandfather named Daniel who reheated roasted potatoes in a skillet every morning for breakfast. He thought he was making a sensible, inexpensive meal. And compared to many fast food breakfasts, honestly, he probably was. But once he switched toward fresh potatoes more often, and occasionally used chilled potatoes in salads with olive oil and herbs, he noticed steadier energy throughout the day. Sometimes the body responds surprisingly well to very small adjustments. And that's really the larger point of this entire conversation. Most major health challenges don't appear overnight. They build quietly, meal after meal, year after year, habit after habit. And when you reach your 60s and beyond, those patterns matter more than ever. I've seen people who exercised regularly, maintained a healthy weight, and still struggled because of the small daily habits nobody talks about. Not dramatic habits, ordinary ones: reheating oils repeatedly, leaving cooked food out too long, using the microwave for everything without thinking twice about it. These routines feel normal because millions of people do them every day. But normal doesn't always mean harmless over time. The good news is that many of these habits are easy to improve once you become aware of them. You don't need perfection. You don't need expensive supplements. You don't need fear. You simply need more intentional choices. Here's a simple way to think about everything we discussed today. For fried foods, avoid repeated oil exposure when reheating. For leafy greens, cook smaller portions and avoid reheating multiple times. For rice, cool and refrigerate it quickly. For chicken, reheat more evenly and more carefully. For potatoes, avoid excessive reheating at very high temperatures. None of this is about restriction. It's about reducing unnecessary stress on a body that has already worked hard for decades. And I want to say something important before we finish. Aging does not mean decline is inevitable. I've met people in their late 60s, 70s, and even 80s with remarkable energy and resilience. Often, the difference comes from small, consistent decisions repeated over time. The kitchen matters more than most people realize. Not because food needs to become complicated, but because simple preparation habits can either support the body or slowly work against it. If someone you care about is over 60, this information may help them think differently about leftovers and reheating habits. And sometimes one small adjustment today can make life feel noticeably better months from now. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves, and pay attention to the quiet habits, because they often shape health more than the obvious ones ever do. Everything shared here is general educational information, and not personal medical advice. Individual needs vary, so always speak with your own healthcare professional regarding personal decisions.